Okay, so they look really different, but all of these three types of algae have a lot in common. They all perform photosynthesis, just like our land plants. They take energy from the sun, use it to convert CO2 into their own biomass. And by doing that, they also produce oxygen. They're actually infusing our waters with oxygen as they do it. And they're taking up and sequestering carbon, as well as nitrogen and phosphorus. And finally, like I said, they provide all the food for the rest of Tahoe as well. However, you definitely have too much of a good thing. Algae can be a problem when it's too abundant. It will eventually decay, and if you have a lot of algae in this can fuck up. Now we're interested. What was I saying? Okay, so it can actually suck oxygen back out of the water to get decays of water. Beyond that, as the clean algae can actually wash up on beaches, which, you know, it doesn't tend to look or smell very good. This is not something we typically want. And then under very specific conditions, some types of algae can be toxic, so they can produce compounds good for us, pets, or other life. And the rest. Testing. Yeah, so I'm going to focus on the bottom of algae, so not really getting into. So we're going to be looking at firefighting. And one reason for that is that beautiful blue lakes like Tahoe are actually a place where bottom-going algae are most common. That's because those beautiful clear waters allow sunlight to actually penetrate to the bottom of the lake, which allows that fuzzy green carpet algae to grow at the bottom. So typically blue waters go together with green waters. In contrast, if you go to lakes that are much more productive with phytoplankton, so those free-living algae, they can proliferate near the water surface. They actually block the sunlight that would normally penetrate to the bottom. So you definitely don't see periphyton or metaphyton in these kind of soupy green lakes. And I think since we're on the topic of soupy green, we'll do a quick diversion to harmful algal blooms. Though I won't spend a ton of time on it today because it's not something else program monitors. But really quickly, what's a harmful algal bloom? It's just a proliferation of toxin producing. That does mean, you know, not all algae blooms are nabs. You can have very abundant algae, it can be smelling, but it's not necessarily. In freshwater systems, it's typically only a few species of cyanobacteria that can produce toxins, but they can even be present at low levels in the lake without ever producing. What actually would trigger a nab? Typically, you need shallow water, stagnant water, and form for that to happen. You need a lot of nutrients to fuel all that growth, just like crops or garden plants. But needs and serving for growth. Again, we keep those very specific if you are interested to learn more about tabs or get updates on where and when it's happening, then take a look at thanks to our government agencies in California and Nevada who do the monitoring for tabs. I'm happy to come back to this slide again if you want pictures. And we've also put out some informational templates up front if you'd like to grab it. But I'll just segue back by saying that luckily, Tahoe is not actually a system where tabs are getting found to form. Partly because it's so large, it's dilute. So it's typically not having those conditions. That said, just because algae is not happening, it can still be a problem. And one thing that's been fascinating in the last decade is that there's been a perception that nearshore algae are increasing in clearwater lakes around the world. So not just here in Tahoe. These pictures show a wash up of nearshore algae at Green Beach a few years ago. That was a year with definitely more problematic algae. And you can see even worse when we have nearshore algae washed up in Lake Baikal, Russia, which is another one of those clear, very deep and cold lakes. So we're kind of seeing a common phenomenon, lots of clear water lakes. When you do see increased algae growth, it can often be an indicator that conditions, environmental conditions are changing potentially for the worse in the lake or the marsh. So it's something we want to pay attention to. And of course, it's relevant for the lake ecology itself. And of course, it is detrimental to the use of the lake. No one wants to, something out of the lake for this. So we have these fundamental questions we need to answer. Is there actually more algae than there used to be? And then, so why is that? Unfortunately, that first question that sounds so basic is really hard to answer. We don't have a good historical baseline for near lake monitoring program typically focus on conditions in the middle of lakes. You're all probably familiar with water clarity monitoring. Most programs look like that. They look at conditions in the middle of lakes, and nearshore areas have almost never been monitored. Probably being a bit of even here at Tahoe, where we do have several decades of monitoring, we've faced for a long time a fundamental trade-off in measuring algae. It's really, really labor intensive and challenging to monitor. It involves snorkeling or scuba diving typically. And so TERC would do these big surveys for algae in spring. They would capture growth. And they would generate maps like you see there, showing where there's more algae or less algae. That's snorkeling at 50+ sites, and it's not feasible to do that, but so we have these basic information. As for why this is happening, that's trickier, but there's kind of three prime suspects. Climate change being suspect number one, a water warming, and that helps algae grow faster. So that is certainly thought to be a factor behind the green lakes worldwide. We have a lot of nutrient pollution from our human activities. So, everything from food, septic, car exhausts, fertilizers, crops, animals that we raise. These can all provide excess nutrients to lakes. And it's just like applying fertilizer to the garden, with algae. And then the third one that doesn't get nearly as much attention, especially outside of Tahoe, is species. So we've so altered what kind of organisms live in our shore. Things like plants, snails, and crayfish can all alter the ecology of our shore. Some of them actually eat the nutrients that are available. Well, we know that some of these factors are definitely happening here at Tahoe. This is actually the graph from the Big Lake report came out very recently, and we know that Lake Tahoe is now a couple degrees warmer than it was. Doesn't sound like a huge change, but it's enough to make sense. And we know based on some experimental work that you can stimulate your cells to grow when you warm them. So Davis actually literally warmed up nearshore algae, little tumors like you can see here, and they stimulated growth especially by warming up water temperature. This work will be published. And then speaking to invasive, certainly have quite a few of those here. This picture you see that green fuzzy carpet metaphyton. Right in the middle, you see a little patch of Asian clam. They've been in Tahoe at least since 2002, and they excrete nutrients that probably help out. So we have that. So we certainly have potential for an increase in algae. But the question is, can we actually measure it and prove it? I mentioned TERC's historic program, which is really unique. Most lakes, nobody does anything in Nearshore, so this is quite fun. They've been monitoring algae for a long time, but only parasites, so only the stuff that was attached to hard substrate. They weren't looking at metaphytes, it was just not a phenomenon with gaining a lot of attention. And it was labeled as snorkel and scuba diving. That really limited the spatial extent that they could go. What we've tried to do in the last year and a half is make use of technology to help us expand the scope of what we can. So we still visit big stations around the lake. You can see where they are on the map. We still do those in the water sampling that we did historically. So we still do the snorkeling and scuba diving to ground truth, sample. But now we're also doing aerial surveillance. So we have drone flights and helicopter flights around the lake to get imagery of what we So the goal of this program is really to be able to detect and quantify change through time. We want to know who's in the lake, which species are living there, where growth is higher or lower, seasonal timing, or when our growth is beginning. And then the big question, spatial coverage and bias. How much is there? I'll kind of skim over this, but we collect all the data. We do it in my plan. We have a taxonomist, she identifies the species we have. And we generate high resolution images of the spots that give us literally pictures. What do we do with it? So the drone flight will generate lots and lots of pictures. They get stitched together into a single composite image. Here's an example you can see at our site in East and West. And then we actually use machine learning models to classify every pixel as either algae or not. And right now this is supervised, so don't worry, our scientists are making sure that the model isn't saying crazy things about, oh, the land is algae. So it's supervised for verifying how well the model is doing. And it's generating a spatial extent of the green area, is what the model says. And it's doing pretty well, given. Here's an example of how that can change. Even in 2003, there's a paraphyting site going from April to October, so you can see that the spatial extent of algae sort of fully decreases. Bottom is one of our metaphyte sites near Lakeside, and there you can see kind of a maximum spatial extent. I believe that's during August, and then by the time we hit September, all of that nice imagery gets condensed into not very exciting looking plots like this, but they have good information. So each little fact that you're looking at is scaling on the bottom axis, and on the vertical axis, the percentage of each site covered by image. And this is verified in 2000. So these are all our verified sites. This will be basically quantify spatial cover algae through time. Few key takeaways from that season. We did see peak cover in April that year, and then kind of a slow decline. We found some spatial differences in where there was more algae. So we tended to find more in some of the northwest shore area. And then metaphyting, we also have a similar set of graphs, 8 metaphyting sites. Slightly different findings here. So first of all, last year, half of our metaphyting sites. And they were all chosen because we knew that they had blooms before. So that's pretty interesting. Last year was certainly a lower growth. And then we did see at the site with metaphyting peak happened in early September. So, where we are right now in the summer, we're not quite at the typical. And those monthly surveys they useful. They serve as two key purposes. They let us keep track of large areas of growth outside our fixed sites. You can see one here offshore in May of 2023. It's outside of our study area, we were able to go ground truth and say, yes, that large green blob. And then the most exciting piece of this imagery from the helicopter flight, we were able to stitch all the imagery on the whole shoreline. We're going to throw it at our model and see if we can classify algal cover for the entire book. It might make the computer crash, but we'll find out within a week or so how well that's. That's kind of very exciting. In terms of, on the ground conditions, what are we seeing in terms of fake algae right now? We certainly are seeing algae, no huge surprise. This is one of our research divers sampling the identifying in Boat Beach a few weeks ago. So yeah, it's out there. One thing I'll say is we are running a little warmer this summer than we were last. So that red dot in the map is showing you where we have some temperature data coming from. And we're seeing nearshore waters that are about a degree warmer than equivalent time. So the potential is there for a bit earlier growth and a little warmer. And we don't have those kind of nicely quantified aerial images yet. But for more growth identified in particular, you could read beach and Lake Tahoe. You can see there's kind of large green blobs that by sort of approaching shoreline. And we don't have the numbers yet, but I would hazard to guess we're going to see a little more that way. And we're not. It's pretty. I think I'll wrap up by returning to this picture. These beautiful blue lakes with sort of green sunny shoreline. I think it's sort of question of are the world's music screaming? We're getting very close to being able to answer. Use better use of technology. So I'm feeling hopeful we can say something about that. Why? That's the next step. And then there's what do we do about it? That's a bit of my free grade. But one thing anyone can do is actually use our I made observation. Algae on top of itself, so the cell can put up there. This arises of connection. Great. I said that algae could have been in April. It's been like that was versus right all repeated. But I don't know if we have any more. We do. We do. Okay. Why did we see peak growth in people? So I guess I should clarify. We have those two different types, terrifying and edifying. And the terrifying are, cold loving. Yeah. So they actually thrive in the winter time. Sometimes they have more nutrients available at that time. And Tahoe waters are so clear that there's so much UV radiation hitting our nearshore areas in summer, it actually can suppress certain algal growth. So once that might actually decrease it a little bit, you see some more. Would AI help you stick together all those photos when you so are we using AI? Well, yeah, we're using a form of that machine learning model. It's sort of, it's a supervised, automatic, semi-not approach. So we're doing it at a small scale in those drone flight areas. That is what we're using. It'll take a lot of training data to be able to do that with shoreline, but luckily we're getting a lot of data. So that is there a nutrient pulse in April? The timing of that summer pulse can be in April, but like a year 2023, where the snowpack was massive, that can actually be much later. So it varies a lot depending on the year. And so all yes, exactly. So, you know, a big snowpack might have a bigger pulse and a later pulse. Um, yeah, depends on the year.
So the rapid drop off in depth with sugar plane versus shallow places to retain agent. Is that happen?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is algae to fairly deep depths at Tahoe. The composition of it has changed significantly. I think the metaphytes tend to thrive in those, yeah, larger shelf areas. They definitely affect what
What condition triggered the toxin production? Because you had a big scare earlier in June, and it warmed up really rapidly. A dog supposedly died from it. And it's really unclear what really happened there.
yeah, I mean, it is unclear. You know, the state did some testing. I don't know that they found anything definitive. We don't test for calves, so I can't really speak to that. But you know, in general, calves are triggered by hot temperatures, the right species being there, and stagnant conditions.
It's aeration, like laminar flow aeration, like the Tahoe Keys have a facility that could do that. Is that helpful for toxic, preventing toxic algae, like cyanobacteria to take over?
Well, I think aerating lakes with cyanobacterial problems, there's a lot of work in Clear Lake and Strange, for example. When lake bottoms lose their oxygen, they start releasing nutrients from the sediments, and that can contribute to algae blooms. I don't know, you know, I don't know if that is a factor here. It's really a factor though. So aeration, you know, sometimes can help with that in systems that have really low.
I didn't hear that person's question, but I was wondering how far out you look at this algae and does it continue to keep growing, or like how far does the UV affect the growth of the algae?
So the question is, how far out are we looking for algae? So I'm assuming farther out from the shoreline.
Yeah.
And then how deep is UV a factor in algal growth?
Yeah.
Let's see. So, you know, we can only go so far out realistically with our monitoring. So those drone flight areas go out maybe 50 to 100 meters out. The helicopter images can capture a little further out from the shoreline, so maybe a couple hundred meters. That is kind of one of the limitations at Tahoe. The water is so clear, you really can get algal growth very deep, deeper than we can feasibly, you know, with our divers, you know, easily. Using aerial imagery gets really challenging when you get far offshore, because stitching images requires having features that look like anything. And that's hard to do with open water. So we're a bit limited there.
Yeah, you mentioned that some lakes with high levels of phytoplankton kind of get that soupy green look to it. What causes Tahoe to not have those high levels of phytoplankton?
So why doesn't Tahoe, oops, here we go. Okay, before it dies. Why does Tahoe not look like green soup? Well, it doesn't have nearly the amount of nutrients you would need. It's incredibly dilute. Nutrient levels are barely detectable with analytical methods, even that our chemists use for dilute waters. It's barely detectable often. So that's the essential reason. Yeah.
Do you have anything to contribute to what the composition of the organisms contribute to the fiber, to these algae? Because when in your one of the first slides you showed the contributing factor. We pump every sewage out, even treated sewage. They're not really adding to the nutrients in the lake because it's all regulated very tightly, including the fertilizers. There's no cows around here that I've ever seen. And there's no toilets that are draining into the lake. It's just not happening. except for cars, and that I don't know if you can even measure the contribution to cars. But what do the phytoplankton, what do they contribute to the differential and the invasive species, which is I think the biggest threat.
Let's see, let me try to summarize that question. So you're wondering what factors might contribute to algal growth?
Yeah.
In Tahoe specifically, well, I'm going to stay away from the phytoplankton because that's not part of our program. That's something TERC monitors, but I'm not involved. The nearshore algae, we have a typical suite of species of algae that you would see in most sort of similar mountain lakes. In terms of what's fueling more growth than maybe there was historically, well, again, warming is part of that picture, so warmer water temperatures. And there's certainly nutrient sources that are not necessarily, local point source. So yeah, the car exhaust, atmospheric deposition of nitrogen in particular is a known issue in lakes around the world. Unfortunately, things like wildfire smoke can deposit a lot of material into lakes, though it's not yet clear how much or how quickly that gets incorporated by algae. I'll just talk if you want. I have no microphones left. Okay, so other factors. I think the invasive species we have here are definitely changing the environment available to algae, particular things like clams. They excrete a lot of they pee. They're like us, they pee. That pee has a lot of nutrients in it. That can certainly fuel very localized algal growth. And that's sort of a big reason we think metaphyton is increasing in those areas near Asian clam beds.
Sorry, not to interrupt you, but so you're saying the pH balance of the lake, right, especially around the lake borders, is an issue in encouraging that. Is runoff from our lawns growing food or adding fertilizers to make things nice a problem?
Maybe. It certainly theoretically can. Measuring sources of nutrients to lakes is tricky, and then what's actually being taken up by algae is tricky. There's actually studies going on around Tahoe that are looking at precisely that. So contribution of fertilizer versus other sources. Yeah. So definitely maybe.
So in the 70 years that the TRK has been going, fertilized golf courses and fertilized lawns has not been measured to see what the impact is for nitrogen and phosphorus loading into this lake. You said maybe it's a contributor, but in 70 years we don't know.
They can estimate the loading. I think what's tricky is measuring infiltration, say in groundwater. So, groundwater is where those types of algae are actually taking up a lot of nutrients. It's not necessarily from surface water inputs like streams. So you can have groundwater that's slowly percolating into the lake, and determining the source of nutrients in that groundwater. It's a mix of a bunch of things.
Okay, but you can't say that.
But it's possible to do it.
So fertilizing all these herbicides that people put on so we can have golf courses in a place that lawns aren't native. You can't say there's zero impact, even if you can't take and tease out the fine hair of one versus the other. It's clear there's some impact.
Any kind of activity that produces nutrients in the
Phosphorus
watershed
and nitrogen
could be a contributor, yeah.
could be a contributor. So, most of us have lived here at least 20 to 50 years, so we've all seen that it looks like that. And when I came only 25 years ago, there was no algae on the rocks up in Incline. And so there's clearly, and then we have the Tahoe Keys, right? When we infilled the lakes to build the housing, and mandated fertilized lawns, and it's our post in front of them. But the damage with all the invasives was so bad with the milfoil and everything, that rather than ban inputs, we add poison, which is now stopped thanks to the Sierra Club. But it's like, how can we not put this together? It looks like a very simple math problem to me, and so it's like, the end of the story to me is like, this is amazing research, just like what Dr. Goldman did for 70 or 80 years. Why isn't it moving the needle for no lawns, zero lawns, unless you can grow it without fertilizers? Why aren't we there? What does it take to get there?
There's a example of Madden Resort on Gull Lake. They actually have a golf course, and it looks beautiful. And they were taught how to mutate their grass so that it grows beautifully without fertilizers, which is what we should be doing around the U.S.
Thank you.
And they did it because, like we should, they realized that their resort relies on the beauty of that lake. So why wouldn't we all want that?
Right.
And so all we have to do is do what Madden Resort did and teach everybody around the lake. And that, who does that? To me, TRPA is responsible for this lake, and they're the ones that should be teaching.
And why isn't that happening when brilliant people like you keep providing the data, like Dr. Goldman and those before you at TERC? I mean, I've been watching this for decades and decades. It's like, and still, well, we don't know. Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We do. I mean, it's like you're saying you're trying to get data to get pictures to see if it's greener. I just look. I can tell you, I don't need any technology. I need no technology. But we're not responding to our intelligence with actions that provide the solutions so that your data can show us something different, because we're not there. I mean, it's just, how is this not frustrating that people are living? I don't know.
Yeah, and I'll just say that.
Can I get an amen?
Yeah, agreed.
See you
I
tomorrow at
agree.
the TRP Oversight Committee.
So, actually, we had invited Lahontan and TRPA, and there was another event that was going on, and there was actually, so Lahontan is all of Region 6, so it's like a bigger area, and they're having halves, not at Tahoe, none, but it was a negative result at Tahoe when they tested the beach. And so they are, Lahontan, the HAB team, had to do emergency visits to other locations where they actually do have HAB problems. Dan Segan was going to be here, but there was another event. He might still come later. We'll see. He just couldn't get here until like 6 or 6:30. 7 or 7:30 at the earliest, which means it's like past the Q&A time. But we are talking about having a sit-down session to have this conversation with the agencies and see if we can't increase our, because everybody's concerned about the harmful algal blooms, if we can't get the League and TERC and TRPA and Lahontan and NDP all together, figure out, can we do like a regular monitoring program for harmful algal blooms? Can we figure out what to do about fertilizer? There was a whole, there was a whole thing, the home landscaping guide for the Tahoe Basin, that was the cooperative extension, that was about,
I still have it.
I still have mine too, that was about using phosphorus-free fertilizer or no fertilizer or limiting lawns and the plants, using native plants. So there is a desire to educate people, but I think it comes down to it's very difficult to tell people what they can and cannot do.
No,
and
it isn't, because we're a national treasure. We have a mandate. That's why it's not hard.
Well,
That's the beauty.
Well, what was discussed last week at this data.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna cut this off because this is a whole separate conversation. I don't want to put everybody through all that, so we're not gonna do that.
This is, so if we can't do policy, because Alex said last week, people don't like rules. And we can't go, he feels as though, and I get it, we'd have to pay a lot of money for people to go around, which they would be fine if they had, but we should make it just, let's get yard signs out around the lake and just make a movement where, because I feel that if people know, there's a lot of people that just don't understand that
Yes,
what
so
they're
they have a
putting
sign
on
that
their
says stop the
yards.
fertilizer, lovely Lake Tahoe
And
stuff
this
and
is-
fertilizer
You have to go
is what
to
the sign says.
Why would we just stop it at where you can buy it locally?
Well,
You
it's
can
bring it
still
in
drive
from
to Reno and
Carson,
grab
bring
it.
it in
There's
from,
no stopping
you know, this
that.
has to be a movement, and people just need to understand. My neighbor had 14 home garden shows. She was so proud of her yard. She lived on the lake. She had manure come in every year to her yard. When I told her what she was doing when I moved there, she stopped immediately. She was so proud of her yard, but she stopped immediately when she understood what it was doing to the lake. Most people here don't understand, the owners don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah, and a lot of people do hire contractors to manage it. Yeah, so I'm just gonna wrap it up for the people who don't wanna live through all of this conversation further. So we'll just wrap it up and say thank you to Adrianne. Thank you so much for coming. All right, we hope you'll come back for our next event, which is if you're interested in oysters or sustainable oysters, raise your hand if you eat oysters. All right, well, I'm impressed that so many people do. So it'll be about sustainable oysters and about what's happening in the ocean. And so it's our Bodega Bay Marine Lab September 12th. Thank you. All right.